today we go Anna talking about the book Hunt, Gather, Parent, and the subtitle is What Ancient Cultures Can Teach Us About the Lost Art of Raising Happy, Helpful Little Human. To say what in the world can make modern people from different countries and cultural backgrounds anxious, parenting would be one of them. The author of this book, Madeline Levine, is an anxious American mother. To outsiders, Levine looks pretty knowledgeable. She holds a Ph.D. in chemistry from the University of California, Berkeley, and has extensive experience. She worked as a radio journalist and has been to many dangerous corners of Africa, the Arctic, and Southeast Asia. She has even won the prestigious Peabody Award in the American broadcasting industry. With such a highly educated background, one might think she would have no issues with parenting. Initially, Levine was full of confidence. After becoming pregnant, she bought many books on scientific parenting methods. These books had lengthy reference lists, giving an authoritative impression. Levine believed she could successfully raise her child by familiarizing herself with these books and following their instructions methodically, like conducting experiments in her student days. However, 2 months after Levine's daughter, Rosie, was born, things began to veer off track. Rosie didn't obediently nurse or sleep well. Levine turned to the parenting books for advice, but a piece of wisdom lasted only a month. When Rosie turned 3, mother and daughter were almost at war. Rosie would often scream and run around, crying and hitting her mother. Levine, who was busy with work, didn't want to waste time and could only yell at her daughter. Even the family dog found their commotion annoying and hid under the bed. At her worst, Levine could only sleep for 20 hours a week. Every morning, she would wake up and wonder how she would get through the day if Rosie started crying again. Many young parents can empathize with scenes like these. Besides enduring, there wasn't a good solution. However, let's remember that Levine was a globe-trotting radio journalist. She began observing different child-rearing methods to resolve her dilemmas while on business trips to various regions. Once, Levine visited a Maya village in Mexico and was surprised that parents there always spoke softly to their children and rarely quarreled. However, the children remained emotionally stable and voluntarily helped with household chores, taking care of younger siblings. The anxiety that plagued Levine seemed non-existent in this environment. Maya's family clearly had no knowledge Maya's family needed to learn of so-called scientific parenting methods. Instead, they followed ancient experiences passed down through generations yet achieved better results. How did science lose to tradition? To answer this question, Levine brought her daughter Rosie to this village and conducted a comparative experiment between her usual parenting style and that of the Maya people. She discovered that while the Maya didn't understand sophisticated theories, they were adept at identifying and guiding children's instincts. Their parenting style didn't emphasize external intervention but focused on fostering the child's autonomy as the primary goal. Similar parenting methods were prevalent in Inuit families in the Arctic Circle and among the Hazda people in Tanzania, and they were equally successful. It was the popular scientific parenting method in developed countries that contained various narrow and extreme methodologies. To dispel the superstition around scientific parenting methods and acknowledge the advantages of traditional parenting methods, Levine, in 2021, combined her experiences from over 3 years of fieldwork to write the English version of this book titled Natural Parenting. The book quickly soared to the top of the New York Times annual bestseller list. Suppose you are a parent eager to shake off parenting anxiety and foster a healthy parent-child relationship in your family life. In that case, the insights from this book will surely inspire you. Next, I'll summarize the book's main content in 2 parts. Firstly, let's examine why popular scientific parenting methods may not be truly scientific and may lead to various problems. In the second part, I'll summarize the experiences Levine extracted from the Maya, Inuit, and Hazda people's cases, revealing the education misconceptions in our daily lives and how we can make improvements. First, let's look at the scientific parenting methods that Duke Liv himself experienced. When Duke Liv's daughter Rosie was 6 months old, he took her to a pediatrician for a checkup. The doctor handed him a form filled with detailed notes on the growth and development of young babies. For instance, they specify how often a baby should be fed every 2 or 3 hours, depending on the baby's age, or the average sleeping duration for infants up to 6 months or a year old. Many parents may feel anxious if their child needs to match these standards, doubting if they're doing something wrong or if their child's development is slower than others. However, as a journalist trained in natural sciences, Duke Liv had other questions. He wondered how these extensive regulations were formulated and whether they were indeed the best advice. To answer these queries, Duke Liv consulted many psychologists and neuroscientists. To his surprise, he found many of the premises and assumptions behind the so-called scientific parenting methods needed to be revised. Many popular parenting suggestions today have yet to be rigorously confirmed through experiments. Pediatrics emerged as an independent discipline in the mid-18th century, and doctors initially compiled the standard parenting manuals we see today from that time. At that time, the readers of parenting manuals were not ordinary parents, but nurses from orphanages. These nurses, who had to care for dozens or even hundreds of young abandoned infants, were overwhelmed and urgently needed doctors to provide advice on standard procedures for infant care to manage their workload. For instance, today's pediatricians usually advise parents of newborns to feed them every 2 hours. This recommendation first appeared in a paper in 1748 in London. At that time, a shelter in London received dozens of abandoned infants daily but lacked enough nurses to care for them. Doctors suggested a fixed feeding schedule to lighten the nurses' workload. In other words, feeding every 2 hours was for management convenience and might not necessarily align with the physiological needs of the babies. With the outbreak of the Industrial Revolution, there was an increasing number of dual-income families in Europe, and the shortage of caregivers became a social phenomenon. In this context, the initially designed parenting manuals for orphanages, promoted by pediatricians, became the revered Bible for ordinary parents. However, theory and techniques only progressed a little from the 18th century and concealed numerous contradictions or fallacies. For example, in the mid-19th century, a British doctor claimed infants needed training to fall asleep smoothly. The best method was to leave a baby alone in the crib and ignore their cries. The baby, noticing that their crying didn't attract parental attention, would eventually fall asleep. This sleep training method has appeared in almost all parenting manuals for over 100 years. However, current research confirms that this approach neglects infants' emotional needs and causes significant psychological harm. It's unscientific. Even in the 21st century, despite medical advancement, the research level in parenting needs to be more consistent. Duke Liv interviewed numerous experts, and they all acknowledged that some experiments targeting newborns failed to gather sufficient samples of families and children. Even some so-called large-scale studies only observed a few hundred samples over a year or two, which can hardly be considered rigorous. The lens through which they observe, akin to using a telescope with insufficient magnification to keep distant celestial bodies, needs to be clearer, and the conclusions are highly dubious. Furthermore, even with enough research samples, the extracted suggestions are only for specific children since individual differences in real life are too significant and environmental factors are too complex. Moreover, the issue with so-called scientific methods is even more significant in the upbringing of infants and toddlers. Duke Liv noticed that popular Western scientific parenting manuals almost always mention the concept of the 3 pillars, believing that they are crucial educational tools parents must prioritize. The first block among the 3 pillars is toys. Scientific parenting encourages parents to buy various toys for their children from birth, believing they have cognitive developmental benefits. However, this claim needs more substantial scientific evidence. Duke Liv discovered that before the 18th century, most infants played with whatever they had and could find joy even by playing with mud to create small items. However, around the mid-19th century, the toy industry began to develop. In order to sell their products, companies started propagating the idea that toys have a restraining effect. Parents eventually accepted this notion. In reality, the proliferation of various toys is a result of the rise of consumerism and has weak associations with science. The second block of the 3 pillars is the learning frenzy, often called tiger parenting. In the United States, it emerged only after the 1950s when the Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite, causing massive technological and knowledge anxiety in American society. This anxiety seeped into children's education and became the phenomenon known as tiger parenting. Under experts' advocacy, American parents excessively pursued their children's academic abilities. Previously, baking cookies with a 4-year-old was considered a good family activity, but now it's insufficient. Children need math classes, outdoor trips, simple play, and educational experiences in botany and geography. Bedtime stories are used to improve a child's vocabulary and expression skills. Over time, tiger parenting transformed into an arms race, making parents even more anxious. The third block of the 3 pillars is endless praise. Duke Liv observed that children from middle-class American families lived in an environment full of flattery. For instance, when he took his daughter to the post office, the staff praised her excessively for simply sticking a stamp on an envelope, as if she had just facilitated peace talks between Israel and Palestine. Mothers consistently praised their children excessively. Duke Liv found that this social atmosphere began in the 1980s and 1990s. During that time, American psychologists and pediatricians repeatedly emphasized that if parents didn't frequently praise their children, it would damage their budding self-esteem. However, self-esteem isn't a natural concept but a post-cultural creation. In the case of the United States, the mainstream culture started emphasizing self-esteem in the 1960s when psychology transitioned from an academic concept into an industry. Many businesses and institutions launched self-help courses, excessively exaggerating the significance of self-esteem. Yet, psychologist Peggy Miller pointed out in her 2017 work that excessive praise might have counterproductive effects. Suppose a child doesn't deserve praise or has an independent personality. In that case, excessive praise might not help instill good behavioral habits and could diminish their motivation to understand and follow the rules. Harvard University studies revealed that approximately 1/3 of American adolescents experience anxiety-like symptoms today. Over 60% of American college students express extreme anxiety, and those born in the mid-1990s to the early 21st century, the so-called Generation Z, are psychologically the loneliest generation in decades. Parents exhaust themselves, assuming they've put in tremendous effort, but the children aren't necessarily happier. Why does this happen? How does it relate to the loopholes in the previously mentioned scientific parenting methods? Duke Liv pointed out that various parenting guidelines we adhere to have developed in Western society over the past 150 years. Their commonality is establishing rules and regulations, demanding parents control their children continually. For instance, sleeping, a natural human instinct to rest when tired and wake when rested, now has precise requirements about when and how long a child should sleep. Parents are now expected to control, adjust, and schedule their children's sleep, similar to, like following a cooking recipe. As a result, getting children to sleep has become a war of control between parents and children, with experts calling it a battle for dominance. This same control dynamic applies to play and learning as well. Toys and games are categorized and ranked, where playing with Lego bricks is considered superior to playing with mud. Reading bedtime stories isn't just about storytelling, it's about teaching children to recognize words and answering comprehension questions. However, before the 19th century, child education was different. Duke Liv quoted a psychologist saying that today's parents have entered a mode of comprehensive control. This exacerbates parental tension and makes children extremely anxious, deteriorating parent-child relationships. If you're a parent concerned about education, you might have heard of 2 common parenting styles, helicopter parenting and free-range parenting. There has been much debate over which is better. Duke Liv bluntly pointed out whether helicopter or free-range parenting focuses on control. Helicopter parents exert the most control, while free-range parents exert the least. In short, it's either adults dictating or children dictating, turning parent-child relationships into power struggles. However, neither parents nor children want to be controlled. So, whichever side gains the upper hand in the struggle will make parent-child relationships tense and antagonistic. So, these were Duke Live's analyses of the widely acclaimed scientific parenting methods, why they might not be scientific, and how they create new problems. Therefore, Duke Live and his 3-year-old daughter ventured into the Maya, Inuit, and Hazda societies, 3 cultures untouched by modern Western influence, hoping to gain inspiration from traditional wisdom and identify the blind spots and misconceptions in prevalent parenting models. In the previous analysis, we mentioned that Duke Live summarized the primary focus of classic Western parenting methods as control. He believed this to be an unachievable approach leading to no-win situations. Instead, he learned the most critical lesson from traditional communities, establishing an intimate cooperative parent-child relationship. What exactly does an intimate cooperative relationship entail? Let's first take a look at the daily state of modern parents. Duke Live said that he carefully arranges his daughter's daily schedule as a mother. If the child doesn't attend daycare, the family will visit the zoo, museums, or amusement parks. They might also do crafts, play with toys, or do puzzles. If Duke Live needs to do household chores, he first thinks about arranging his daughter correctly, letting her stay in the living room or kitchen to play without interfering with what mom is doing. The child's distraction could reduce mom's work efficiency. These arrangements seem reasonable, but after observing the Maya, Inuit, and Hazda people's practices, Duke Live realized that there's a clear divide between children and adults in his own home. This boundary tells children that their role at home is to play with Lego, watch cartoons, and eat, while parents' roles are to clean, cook, do laundry, and take the child to various activities. Parents become the child's activity managers, responsible for planning their day to ensure the child has a good time. In this situation, children and parents live in 2 different worlds. Children cannot understand the thoughts and needs of parents. On one hand, children feel very submissive because they're constantly being directed and are excluded from the adult world. On the one hand, children feel very submissive because they're constantly being directed and are excluded from the adult world. On the other hand, they feel very proud because they don't need to take on responsibilities and are unaware that they should consider their parents' feelings. Duke Live suggests breaking this boundary between children and adults to find opportunities to merge the 2 worlds. The so-called intimate cooperation means family activities are not solely centered around the child. Parents allow children to be with them when they need or want to do something. Children are welcome to help, and they're allowed to engage in their activities. In this situation, parents and children coexist in the same space without requiring each other's attention to focus solely on themselves. This relationship is relaxed and fluid. This sounds abstract, so let's give an example. Duke Live observed in the Maya community that the children there are very responsible. They can arrange their activities, pay attention to what needs to be done in the house, and proactively complete these household chores. These chores don't require parents' commands or orders. Psychologists note that children naturally pay attention to their environment and understand others' needs. This is a human trait. If parents can use this trait well and encourage children to take action and responsibility, it will benefit them for life. In the book, Duke Live also discusses the matter of anger about raising children. Handling anger is undoubtedly a practice for every parent. Psychology and neuroscience have a concept called executive function, which refers to a person's ability to maintain rational thinking when experiencing impulsive emotions and to control emotions and behavior. Research indicates that the stronger a child's executive function, the better their learning outcomes, mental health, and interpersonal relationships will be in the future. However, executive function needs to be learned. If children often witness their parents getting overwhelmed by anger, they will find it difficult to understand how to control their emotions. Duke Live found that Inuit children have strong executive functions. They can see situations from another child's perspective and are flexible in adapting to changing circumstances and meeting others' needs. Moreover, parents here rarely get angry with their children. How do they achieve this? It turns out that the Inuit believe that when children throw tantrums, it's because they haven't learned the right way to handle problems. They aren't trying to provoke or test their parents' patience, so there's no need for parents to feel angry about it. The real value of parents is to help children learn to manage their emotions. Once, Dukrif, Rosie, and an Inuit mother were walking together. Rosie became tired and started having a tantrum, crying and screaming. In an exaggerated tone of amazement, the Inuit mother walked over to Rosie, knelt, and said, "Look at this beautiful sunset. Can you see the pink and purple colors?" Initially skeptical, Rosie then looked at the sky, her eyes softening. She stopped crying, stood up, and started walking again. The Inuit mother told Dukrif that they teach children to replace anger with awe. They redirect the child's attention to something beautiful, like a butterfly, a lovely flower, or the clouds in the sky. They remind the child that there are beautiful and appreciable things in life, things broader than just themselves, and not to let anger obscure all that.